Hello and welcome to the Caledonian YouTube channel. I wanted to make a quick video on responsibility. Responsibility is one of the most important pillars that runs through the marking sheet for the standards check and the part 3 test, and it's one of the most important concepts that you need to get your head around if you're going to be a successful coach, a successful driving instructor. Getting your pupils to take responsibility is not something that happens automatically. You need to work at it. And quite often when we're doing rescue training with PDIs or qualified instructors, it's just something that we tend to hear over and over again. I have this particular pupil and I can't get them to, step up to the plate, take responsibility. They're relying on me too much. So I wanted to point out the fact that responsibility should not be difficult. And the reason it should not be difficult is that we have many opportunities in the course of a driving lesson to get people to take responsibility, and I'm going to run through them for you just now. So the very first way to get your pupils to take responsibility for their learning is by asking them to reflect. Now, we don't have time in this video to give you a full rundown on reflection and how reflection works and how to get your pupils to reflect properly, but learning how to get your pupils into that self-assessment frame of mind is absolutely key. What it means is once they start to self-assess and reflect for themselves, they're relying on themselves for feedback. They're not relying on the driving instructor for feedback. So the first opportunity you have is reflection at the end of a lesson to get them to I'm thinking kind of your first driving lesson, the end of your first driving lesson. It's your first opportunity to get people taking responsibility for the next driving lesson by going away, having a think about it, and maybe making some notes, thinking about what went well, what didn't go so well, and based on that, what would they like to do next? Which leads us on to the second way that you can get your pupils to take responsibility, and that's through picking their own goals. If a pupil sets their own goal, they're more likely to commit to it and they're more likely to put effort into achieving it, and they will enjoy it and get more satisfaction from achieving it. And a good example to kind of clarify this point is think about how you felt when you qualified as a driving instructor, or for the PDIs, think about how you felt when you passed your part 2. Now, it felt great. And I know it felt great because I can remember how I felt when I passed it. But the reason it felt great is what I want you to focus on. The reason it felt great is that you decided to become a driving instructor on your own. Your training manager didn't tell you to become a driving instructor. It's something that you thought about in great detail, you did some research into, and you decided that that was going to be your personal goal or your professional goal. And you put the effort in. And you found yourself a trainer, you practiced on your own, you did the self-study, you booked yourself a test, you went and you smashed it. And that's why it feels good. It's your goal. And the same principle applies to your learner driver. If you get your pupil used to selecting their own goals from an early stage in the process, you will get much more buy-in, you will get much more enthusiasm, rather than what happens when you tell your pupil what we're going to do today. The next way you can get them to take responsibility is by building on that whatever they pick to be their goal and to be their topic, get them to research it on their own. The days of delivering a 10-minute briefing at the start of your driving lesson should be gone. There's no real need to be doing it anymore. If your pupil decides that they want to do roundabouts on their next lesson as the results of the reflection, then ask them to go and do research into roundabouts. Tell them to get onto essential skills, into the highway code, onto YouTube, asking their parents, asking their friends. They can come to the driving lesson and they can do the briefing for you. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect and it might be mixed up a little bit, but that's your job as a coach, as a facilitator, to correct that where it's required. The point is that they're taking responsibility on their own shoulders to go and do the work before the lesson. That's taking responsibility for their own learning. The next thing you can do is include them in things like the structure of the lesson. So what route are you going to take today? Which roundabouts are you going to go to? What directions do you want to take at these roundabouts? Do they want to do lefts? Do they want to do straight ahead, find another circuit? Include them in the process, and you will get more buy-in, you'll get more enthusiasm, the lesson will be more balanced, the relationship will become more equal, which stands you in really good stead for everything going forward in the driving lessons. You can elicit feedback on performance. I think most of us are aware of scaling by now. Scaling is just a form of reflection. It's the same process. The important thing about eliciting feedback is that it relies on self-assessment. It relies on the pupil or the client asking themselves questions and being honest with themselves. And again, as I mentioned previously, not relying on the coach or the driving instructor for feedback. It's not a passive relationship where they're just waiting to be told they did well or waiting to be told what they did wrong. Taking responsibility for assessment is identifying their own weaknesses and identifying their own strengths. Self-congratulating themselves on what they're doing well is a really, really important part of feedback as well. Transferring responsibility through levels of instruction is probably the most common way that we do address responsibility in CAR, and it's one that probably comes easiest to us because even as instructors, traditional instructors, we've done this. Whether that's starting off with a full talk through and gradually transferring responsibility as your client becomes independent, backing off a little bit, eventually ending up in prompting scenarios where you're just leaving them to it with the odd prompt for a mirror check here and there, and then hopefully just getting them independent. Having conversations about that transfer is important. Don't just do it without talking about it, because then they will be more aware that they are taking responsibility for themselves. Another way that they can take responsibility is on the risk management section at the start of the lesson when you're discussing who's responsible for what parts of the drive. So no matter what stage the learner driver is at, there is something that they can take responsibility for. They should take responsibility for things that they have previously learned and mastered, blind spot checks, moving off and stopping, even the cockpit drill. It doesn't matter what the topic is, what the skill is. The point is that they are responsible for it and that they understand how that process works, i.e. they learn something, they master it, and then the instructor backs off and has nothing else to do with that aspect. Obviously, we're there if something falls through the gaps or they just forget, but for the most part, they are taking responsibility. Encouraging private practice and home study. I mentioned earlier on about the pupils doing research into new topics, but talking to them about private practice, encouraging them to get in cars with their parents if their parents are happy to do that. There are some great books out there, great resources online that can help parents become comfortable with this kind of thing. Offer to have a chat with the parents if that helps as well. Research shows that learner drivers who take more private practice are more likely to pass on the first attempt. That's from a skills perspective. That's obviously very important. In this particular video, we're addressing responsibility though, and having your pupil take responsibility for nagging their mum and dad, if you like, to take them out for a drive is a key indicator of them, pushing their own learning and taking control of their own learning. Effective Q&A, encourage critical thinking, encourage them to ask questions of you. This comes down to rapport and having that right learning environment within the car, that they're not afraid to ask questions. People who ask questions are taking responsibility for their learning. They're trying to take the lesson in a direction that it wasn't going in with you leading it, and that's absolutely fine. You should absolutely encourage that at all times. So that's a quick 10-minute video on responsibility. It is, in my opinion, the most important aspect of the standards check marking sheet, the part 3 marking sheet. One of the most important aspects of just being a driving instructor and being an effective coach. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much. Have a good day.